I'm asking Canadians for a strong, positive mandate to deal with President Trump. Like Germany, Canada, partnership with the European Union can provide stability and prosperity for our citizens.
Prime Minister Mark Carney today met with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and the two signed an agreement to supply Canadian critical minerals.
We not become completely over-reliant on the U.S. And that is why I'm in Germany right now.
We need to be closer to our allies.
We're concentrating our efforts to fight for the very people that are in the steel sector, that are in the aluminum sector.
We will become stronger and we will diversify and turn ourselves towards Europe.
As I'm working on making sure that we're helping businesses pivot.
What if I told you that Canada just delivered a shock to the world so powerful that Donald Trump himself is left regretting his every move, while Mark Carney and Mélanie Joly quietly pull the country into a brand new era of strength and independence? This is not a headline from the future. It is happening right now on September 2nd, 2025, and the numbers and testimonies prove it. Carney's Canada is no longer waiting for Trump's unpredictable America. It is building its own course, forging new trade links, cementing defense partnerships, and writing an economic strategy that puts sovereignty first. In Berlin this week, while U.S. trade talks stumbled in Washington, Canadian ministers were busy signing agreements. Industry Minister Mélanie Joly, speaking directly on CBC, explained Canada's mission to diversify, to reduce reliance on the U.S., and to create new bridges with Europe. We need to make sure that we do not become completely over-reliant on the U.S., and that is why I am in Germany right now.
We need to be less reliant on the U.S. to become closer to Europe,
she said. Her words struck a chord not just with policymakers, but also with small business owners across Ontario and Quebec. A survey from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business released yesterday showed that 62% of SMEs believe diversifying to Europe and Asia is now essential for survival, up from 41% just 3 years ago. The first pillar of this new strategy is trade. In Berlin, Canada signed agreements with Germany on critical minerals, copper, lithium, nickel, and rare earths.
Prime Minister Mark Carney today met with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and the two signed an agreement to supply Canadian critical minerals.
These are not symbolic deals, they are the backbone of future economies. The International Energy Agency projects that demand for lithium will triple by 2030, and Canada is positioning itself at the center of that supply chain. German automaker Volkswagen confirmed it will source part of its battery minerals from Canadian mines in Sudbury and northern Quebec, a deal worth an estimated $3.5 billion over the next decade. Canadian minerals are vital for Europe's clean energy transition, said German Economy Minister Robert Habeck. These words signal that Europe sees Canada not as a junior partner, but as a pillar of its own industrial future. For Canadian workers, the consequences are concrete. The United Steelworkers Union in Sudbury stated that the German agreements could secure up to 2,000 jobs in mining and processing, a lifeline in a region that has faced repeated layoffs. In Quebec, Premier François Legault celebrated the partnership, noting that these contracts will not only sustain our communities, but also anchor Canada as a global supplier of clean minerals. For SMS, the ripple effect is equally important. A small manufacturing firm in Windsor told reporters that access to European contracts for EV parts could boost their revenues by 30% within 2 years. Farmers are also adapting to this shift. The Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance reports that canola exports to Europe rose by 14% in the first half of 2025, offsetting losses from U.S. tariffs. One farmer in Saskatchewan explained that European buyers now account for nearly 40% of his annual sales, giving him stability he never had before. Small logistics firms in Manitoba confirm similar gains as container traffic from Winnipeg to Hamburg has increased steadily. These stories highlight how ordinary producers, not just large corporations, are benefiting from Canada's pivot. The second pillar is defense. Canada's next generation of submarines is about to be built, and a German company is now one of the 2 finalists. By linking defense procurement to European partners, Canada is signaling that it will not be dependent on any one country.
This is going to be one of the biggest procurement projects ever in Canadian military history. It could be $20–25 billion.
Carney has made defense modernization central to his agenda. His government has pledged to quadruple defense spending by 2035, pushing the figure to 5% of GDP. That would make Canada's defense budget larger than Italy's and comparable to France's in proportional terms. In August, Ottawa announced $2 billion in new aid for Ukraine, and just last week in Latvia, Carney extended Operation Reassurance through 2029, committing thousands of troops to NATO's eastern flank. Canadian officials argue this is not just symbolism, but a strategic necessity. "We cannot rely on promises that change with every election in Washington," said Defense Minister Anita Anand. "Our sovereignty depends on partnerships built on trust, and Europe has proven itself a reliable ally." NATO. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg echoed this view in Brussels, praising Canada's long-term commitment as a stabilizing force in the alliance. Citizens are also paying attention. An Angus Reid poll taken last week showed 58% of Canadians now support higher defense spending compared to only 29% in 2019. Public opinion is also shifting in surprising ways. A survey by Ledger found that 64% of Canadians now believe their country should take on a bigger role in NATO compared to only 35% in 2018. Veterans associations argue that better funding will finally modernize outdated bases in Petawawa and Edmonton, creating safer conditions for troops. Meanwhile, Canada's defense industry expects new contracts to generate over 15,000 skilled jobs in shipbuilding and aerospace by 2030, particularly in Halifax and Vancouver. These developments are transforming defense into both a strategic and economic engine for the country. The third pillar is economic sovereignty. Carney's government is mobilizing billions in new investments across energy infrastructure, digital connectivity, and industrial development. Just last month, Ottawa unveiled a $15 billion green infrastructure package with funds earmarked for hydrogen projects in Alberta and broadband expansion in rural Manitoba. According to Statistics Canada, these projects could generate over 120,000 jobs nationwide by 2027. Mélanie Joly was clear on CBC. "This is about ensuring Canadian businesses have access to European markets while European capital and technology flow into our communities. This strategy is not only about corporations, it directly impacts small and medium-sized enterprises. The CanExport program has already granted $75,000 subsidies to over 600 SMEs to help them develop strategies for entering European markets." One Montreal-based software startup reported that EU contracts now account for 40% of its revenues, up from 0 2 years ago. "Without these programs, we would be stuck fighting for survival in the U.S. market, where tariffs and political uncertainty constantly disrupt our plans," said its founder. But Carney's pivot is also about values. Canada wants to align with allies who share its commitment to democracy, freedom, and collective security. This is where the contrast with Donald Trump is the sharpest. While Trump sidelines allies and plays transactional games with NATO, Canada is proving that partnerships based on trust deliver real results. Joly told CBC to be here in Europe and to open markets for entrepreneurs to attract investment to build the strongest economy of the G7. That is our mission. The past week alone illustrates the scope of Canada's transformation. In Kiev, Carney announced $2 billion in aid and stood alongside President Zelensky. In Berlin, he signed mineral and energy deals. In Kiel, German shipbuilders were shortlisted for the submarine program. In Latvia, he committed troops until 2029. Every step reinforced the message: Canada is not waiting for U.S. approval. It is writing its own role in the world. The impact on ordinary Canadians is already visible. Workers in steel and aluminum industries see their jobs secured by European contracts. Farmers in Saskatchewan are finding new buyers for canola and lentils in Germany and the Netherlands. In British Columbia, SMS, exporting clean tech components, are accessing new EU markets worth hundreds of millions. A study by RBC Capital Markets estimates that Canada-EU trade could grow from $100 billion today to $160 billion by 2030, reducing Canada's vulnerability to U.S. tariffs by nearly 40%. The political contrast is also sharp. While Trump's rallies focus on grievances, Carney emphasizes ambition. While Trump demands loyalty, Joly speaks of partnerships. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford, once known for siding with U.S. interests, admitted last week that Canadian businesses are better off building bridges to Europe than waiting for the next tariff threat from Washington. Economists echo this. TD Bank's latest report forecasts Canada's GDP growth at 2.1% for 2026 if EU trade expands as planned, compared to just 1.3% if Canada stays overly dependent on the U.S. Small and medium-sized tech firms are seizing the opportunity as well. A fintech startup in Calgary reported that its partnership with a German bank doubled revenues in less than 12 months. Energy SMEs are also finding new ground. An Alberta-based hydrogen company just signed a $120 million supply contract with the Netherlands, ensuring long-term stability for 250 employees. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce confirms that more than 45% of SMEs now view Europe as their fastest-growing market. This diversification not only protects businesses from U.S. shocks, but also fuels innovation across provinces. Even citizens feel the difference. A recent Ipsos poll found that 61% of Canadians believe the country now has greater global influence than at any point in the past 25 years. Among younger voters, that figure rises to 72%. Pride is returning. For the first time in my life, I feel Canada is not living in America's shadow, said a student in Toronto interviewed by CBC. We are standing on our own. Of course, challenges remain. Critics argue that expanding defense spending could strain the federal budget, and some exporters still worry about the complexity of EU regulations. But even skeptics admit the diversification strategy reduces long-term risk. Economist Armin Yalnizyan noted Canada cannot afford to tie its future to one market, especially a volatile one. Diversification is not just smart, it is survival. So what does all this add up to? It adds up to a Canada that is resilient, ambitious, and determined to lead. Jobs in auto and steel industries are being protected. Soldiers are being equipped with modern tools. Small businesses are accessing new markets, and the nation's pride is being restored. The message is clear. Mark Carney's government is positioning Canada as a true global power. Europe is no longer just a partner. It is a cornerstone of Canada's future. And Donald Trump, he is watching from the sidelines, realizing that his stage is no longer needed. Carney and Joly are showing that Canada doesn't need permission. This is the era of diversification. This is the era of Canadian strength. And above all this is the era of leadership. If you want to stay updated as Canada continues this bold pivot, every speech, every deal, every step that reshapes our global role, make sure you subscribe because the story of Canada's rise is only just beginning.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is taking fresh steps to reposition Canada's trade relationships.
Canada, in partnership with the European Union, can provide stability and prosperity for our citizens.
And Canada announced today that it has narrowed down the potential bidders or suppliers for those subs to two companies, one in South Korea, a Hanwha Ocean company, and the other a German-Norwegian consortium.
Submarine means weeks under the sea ice, as well as in the Pacific.
This is going to be one of the biggest procurement projects ever in Canadian military history. It could be $20–25 billion.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperation, is over.
What if I told you that the single biggest submarine deal in decades just slipped out of America's hands and landed squarely in Canada's shipyards, sending shockwaves through steel mills, electronics factories, and defense towns across the United States? On September 2, 2025, Ottawa made it official: the $20 billion submarine contract that Donald Trump demanded for U.S. shipyards will not be coming to Groton, Newport News, or Pittsburgh. Instead, Canada is keeping the work at home, and the fallout is already reshaping the balance of North American defense power. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney stood in Ottawa this morning and declared Canada will decide where its defense dollars go. This project will be built by Canadian workers with Canadian steel and under Canadian command. His words drew thunderous applause in Parliament but stunned Washington. Officials had assumed Canada would eventually bend under pressure. Defense analysts say this is the first time in modern history that Ottawa has openly refused to outsource such a massive naval project to the United States. The numbers are staggering. According to Canada's Ministry of Defense, the program will create or sustain over 14,000 direct jobs in Halifax and Vancouver shipyards, plus an estimated 22,000 indirect jobs in component manufacturing and supply chains nationwide. By contrast, U.S. labor unions now warn that more than 18,000 American jobs tied to submarine construction are at risk. "We were told to prepare for years of steady work," said John Martinez, a union leader in Groton, Connecticut. "Now we're staring at empty order books. Canada just slammed the door in our faces. For Trump, this is a political nightmare. Just weeks ago, he toured Ohio and Pennsylvania, touting the deal as proof his tariff policies were reviving American manufacturing. In Youngstown, he promised, "We will keep the submarine jobs here at home, not overseas." Yet, by imposing tariffs of up to 25% on Canadian steel and aluminum earlier this summer, Washington triggered retaliation that made cooperation nearly impossible. Canadian quotas and export restrictions cut off critical inputs for U.S. submarine hulls, and Ottawa seized the moment to pivot inward. The economic shock is visible across the industrial heartland. In Pittsburgh, U.S. Steel confirmed this morning that orders for specialized submarine hull plates worth $1.2 billion have been frozen indefinitely. In Wisconsin, two electronics firms, Clear Sonar Systems and Midwest Defense Electronics, announced layoffs of 350 workers combined after contracts for sonar and navigation modules were suspended. Even small subcontractors are suffering. A family-owned pump manufacturer in Kansas City reported losing $4 million in expected revenue. That forced them to consider cutting a third of their workforce. Owner David Reynolds told reporters, "We invested in new equipment because the government told us this deal was guaranteed. Now we may not survive the year. Politicians are already seizing on the crisis." Senator Lindsey Graham declared that Canada's betrayal is a direct attack on American security and an insult to every taxpayer who funds NATO. But Democrats argue the blame lies at Trump's feet. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio said these tariffs were supposed to protect workers. Instead, they priced our own companies out of the deal and handed Canada the perfect excuse to keep jobs at home. A new CNN Angus Reid joint poll released today shows 61% of Canadians support keeping the project domestic, while only 29% believe it should be shared with U.S. shipyards. The Pentagon is scrambling. Internal memos leaked to Reuters suggest the Department of Defense is considering redirecting emergency funds to keep Groton and Newport News afloat, but the gap is enormous. The Congressional Budget Office estimates filling the void would cost U.S. taxpayers at least $16 billion over the next 3 years. That money isn't sitting around, warned Representative Adam Smith, ranking Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee. We're already staring at a $37 trillion national debt. Every dollar lost in contracts is another dollar we'll have to borrow. For American workers, the psychological blow may be even worse than the financial one. In Norfolk, Virginia, welder Mark Evans described the mood. "We rolled the steel, we prepped the lines, we were ready, then Canada just pulled the rug out. It feels like betrayal from our closest ally." Similar frustration echoes in Ohio's Mahoning Valley, where steel mills that had ramped up production are now scaling back shifts. Local officials warn unemployment claims could surge by 20,000 in the region by the end of the year if no replacement contracts are found. Small and medium-sized businesses are especially vulnerable. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, nearly 1,100 SMEs in 27 states were tied to the Canadian submarine supply chain. These firms supply everything from precision castings to wiring systems. With orders suddenly evaporating, many face insolvency. "We had built our 5-year plan around this contract," said Lisa Carter, CEO of a small Missouri-based aerospace component company. "Without it, we'll have to lay off staff and shelve expansion. It's devastating." The geopolitical implications are just as serious. By choosing to keep the project in Halifax and Vancouver, Canada is signaling its determination to carve out an independent defense identity. Analysts note this mirrors moves by European allies who invest in domestic shipbuilding to reduce reliance on U.S. suppliers. Germany and Norway are already partnering on advanced submarine technology, and Canadian officials are reportedly in talks to join that consortium. A European diplomat in Brussels told the Financial Times, "If Canada can say no to Washington and still remain a core NATO member, it opens the door for others." This precedent alarms Washington. For decades, U.S. defense dominance has rested not only on military might, but also on economic scale, contracts spread across dozens of states creating a web of political support. If allies begin turning to alternative suppliers, that model collapses. The Pentagon fears a domino effect. Australia, Japan, or even the UK could decide to prioritize domestic or European builds instead of relying exclusively on American shipyards. China and Russia are watching closely. Beijing's state-run Global Times ran a headline today declaring even allies reject U.S. defense monopoly. Experts warn that if American shipyards operate below capacity per unit, costs will rise, delivery schedules will slip, and Washington's global naval presence will weaken. Meanwhile, Moscow is quick to exploit NATO tensions. Russian state media claimed that Canada's defiance proves the alliance is fractured and U.S. hegemony is fading. The Arctic dimension adds another layer. With melting ice opening new shipping lanes, Canada has hinted that part of its expanded submarine fleet will patrol the northern waters. "We will not cede the Arctic to anyone," Prime Minister Carney said today in a thinly veiled message to both Washington and Moscow. If Canada strengthens its presence there, America's ability to dictate security in the region could diminish for the first time in generations. Domestically, Trump faces a brutal political backlash. His campaign had tied the submarine contract to promises of restoring manufacturing in swing states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Now, instead of ribbon cuttings, these communities are bracing for layoffs. A recent Quinnipiac poll found that 54% of voters in Michigan believe Trump's tariff policies are hurting more than helping, a significant shift from just 38% 6 months ago. Political strategists warn this could swing key states in the 2026 midterms. Businesses are also sounding the alarm. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce issued a rare rebuke yesterday, calling the loss of the contract a self-inflicted wound. Their statement read, "Protectionist policies that limit cooperation with allies are not protecting jobs, they are destroying them." Meanwhile, the Defense Industry Association calculated that the $20 billion loss will reduce U.S. defense sector output by nearly 7% this year. That is the sharpest decline since 2009. Even America's tech sector feels the shock. Submarine projects drive innovation in sonar stealth coatings and advanced battery systems technologies with civilian applications in healthcare, aviation, and energy. By losing the contract, U.S. research universities and startups lose billions in funding opportunities. As one Silicon Valley engineer put it, the next breakthrough in acoustic mapping may come out of Vancouver instead of California. The stakes go far beyond economics. Submarines are not just ships, they are the silent backbone of naval deterrence. Without them, America's ability to project power in the Pacific and Atlantic weakens precisely as China is launching new vessels at record speed. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, China commissioned 6 new submarines in 2024 alone, while Russia continues investing in next-generation models despite sanctions. If U.S. production slows, the strategic gap could widen. The Pentagon now faces 2 grim options: either inject tens of billions in emergency funding to sustain idle shipyards, adding to the already swollen federal deficit, or accept reduced capacity and risk falling behind rivals. Neither choice is appealing. Former Defense Secretary Leon Panetta told NBC yesterday, "This isn't just about jobs, it's about credibility. If even Canada won't trust us as a defense partner, why should Japan or Germany?" For Ottawa, however, the move is seen as a triumph. Canadian officials highlight that keeping the project domestic will pump an estimated $38 billion into the economy over 2 decades, including secondary effects. "We are not just buying submarines," said Defense Minister Anita Anand. "We are investing in Canadian workers, Canadian technology, and Canadian sovereignty. The long-term consequences are only beginning to unfold." By breaking with the tradition of outsourcing to U.S. shipyards, Canada has sent a signal that allies can pursue independent paths without fear of American retribution. For Washington, that is perhaps the most dangerous message of all. As former Senator Claire McCaskill said on MSNBC, if Canada can stand up to Trump and walk away with $20 billion, others will take note. This is the crack in the wall everyone has been waiting for. And so, on September 2, 2025, the world watches as the closest defense partnership in North America is shaken to its core. The $20 billion submarine contract is gone. The workers in Groton and Pittsburgh are left with silence, and America is grappling with a sobering new reality. Protectionist policies meant to shield its industries are accelerating their decline. The question now is not whether America can recover, but whether its allies still see it as the indispensable partner it once was. If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like and subscribe. We will continue tracking every twist in this escalating battle over jobs, defense, and the future of U.S. global leadership. And leave us a comment. Do you believe Trump's tariff strategy is defending American workers, or is it driving our allies away at the very moment we need them most?